I think that the initial thing the government wanted to do is to use the 701 billion as a payment assurance to generation companies and gas suppliers so that they can continue to generate and produce power. And then within 2 years, it will put in place a new tariff. The tariff does not mean that it would transfer the full cost of production to the consumers, but that way the government can bridge, either through appropriation or through loans or something to bridge the industry. So you have a period of under recovery, and then maybe 2-3 years later, when there is more generation, then you can begin to recover for the short period. But what we're not seeing getting there, that putting in place that tariff or doing all the work that is required to do so that you can come to that point. And what you just said, to the extent that there is no benchmark for distribution companies, then government does not even know what on a month-to-month basis the payment assurance is going to pay.
Mr. Wonodi, can you, looking at this sector, looking at all the cogs that make the system run, can you really regulate the greed of the private sector? In the sense that if you're a distribution company now, and let's just assume that you're able, and this is not happening now, but let's just assume that you can distribute all the power that you're getting from the generation companies. You're making all sorts of money that nobody can really account for via estimated billing. And the oversight functionaries that are watching you aren't necessarily empowered, as it were, to really stop you from doing what you're doing. What's the end game here? Because ultimately the customers are suffering, the distribution companies are making money, and the system is running on an unsustainable cycle.
Well, I think you just hit a very important point. If you listen to the public hearing, or the hearing that was held sometime in Lagos, one of the things that you hear from the consumers is that it would seem like NERC, the regulator, is unable to protect them, right? And the authority of the regulator in this particular sector is questionable to a large extent. It is the only sector that the regulator puts out a regulation to govern its licensees, and then licensees go to court, and a court grants some injunction and stops it from implementing a regulation that is put out. It does not happen in the banking sector. When central bank talks, all banks and all financial institutions folding. Same thing with the Security and Exchange Commissions. When they come out with a regulation or put an order or put a fine, people just comply. Or National Communications Commission. It's only in the power sector that we've seen, in a situation where the regulator puts a regulation to govern the sector or takes an action, and the licensees go to court and stop it. So it undermines the regulator. So I think that one of the places to start, if I were in the National Assembly, is how to make sure that the regulator is very strong, has the authority, and is able to not just be only independent, but being strong enough to enforce its regulation. I think there's a big gap, and you touched on something that is very, very critical for the sector.
So now if you're looking at how to solve this problem, we're hearing that the 701 billion that is supposed to last until 2019 is actually going to not last, is going to fall short, I believe, something like 4 or 5 months ahead of time because of the non-remittance of the distribution companies. If that happens, the system potentially collapses. Is this another situation where the distribution companies understand that if they don't remit, there's no consequence because ultimately the federal government will have to step in with more cash backing to stop the industry from collapsing?
Well, it might seem that way because you cannot let the power sector just go away. So there is a need to urgently address that issue of what the distribution companies, what are their contracts with the bulk trader, the vesting contract, and how much they must pay. That's something that needs to be hurriedly put in place to help the sector. But it requires a lot of work to be done in building up that tariff. We have issues where people talk about the speed at which meter penetration should happen when we do not even know how many people or how many consumers are out there. So enumeration is not been done, 5 years after privatization, almost 5 years. You should expect that by this period, you should know all your consumers and all the customers that are within each DISCO footprint. Then that way you can plan very, very well.
The knowledge of your customer, how effective has that been, if by this period, after this privatization has taken place. The discos would say they hardly know their customers. Some would say it's a problem of metering. Why are we still having these issues of metering so that many of these consumers are still having to get estimated bills?
Well, as far as there is the issue of funding, having the enough funds to procure the meters and then begin the installation. So I think that it's a recognition of that and the pressure that has been put that the regulator has tried to put out this meter asset provider regulation that allows for companies to come in with finance and help in the rollout of meters. So that's a response to what we have, and hopefully that could make a difference at the rate meters are deployed. But the regulation is out there, and then we have to work.
But is the regulation consumer friendly? Because there are some people who are willing to even go out there and buy the meters on their own, but the discos will say, no, those meters will be bypassing, could be bypassed at the end of it. So what if the individuals are able to buy the meters and then the discos get to install them so that they can monitor how they are used? Because at the end of the day, these people still don't get enough power, as you talked about it. They're not getting up to 6 hours of power. They're not able to, government is not able to even monitor their consumption of power because there are no meters. But then at the end of the day, they get to pay so much money.
Well, I think that the regulation that's been put out by the regulator, by NERC, is a consumer-friendly to a large extent, but still there is implementation. The whole thing is that you might plan to do good, but the pathway to it, it's not quite there. So it's consumer-friendly. The whole idea is we want to get meters to the consumers as quickly as is possible, but implementation, there are a little quirks that need to be cleaned out to make that work.
On that, we're going to just take a very short break. We will be back in a moment. Our viewers, please do stay with us. Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Standing by with us is Rumundaka Wonodi, a former chief executive officer of the Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading Company. And my colleague Nyota has a question.
Yeah, so this matter of consumption, paying for what you consume, and regulation and enforcement, would a legislation from the House of Representatives or from the National Assembly, as the case may be, would it help to take care of that issue of estimated billing?
Well, laws can help, but you have to look at the framework we're working with. I've looked at the bill as prepared. It gets into the nitty-gritty of what should be left to regulation, right? It stipulates that once you pay the disco within 30 days, they must, provide you meter. You have to look at the capacity of the metering industry to even provide that, and the number of people that you're required to do that. So, to a large extent, it could mean that you've just legislated that everybody must be metered within 1 month. Because if everybody went to the disco today, it means that within a month. And it's, so it has some challenges. I think that the meter asset providers regulation put out by NERC is a good starting point because it looks at it and how you can do this over a period of time.
But what if it hasn't been effective and the lawmakers are thinking of how to make it more effective?
Well, this just came out in March of this year, right? So you just have to give it time and work with it. Granted, it's understood why the lawmakers should feel the way they do because, the consumers are very frustrated about this issue. But on the other side of this is also the issue of energy theft. So once you put a meter, it does not take care of the revenue issue because we have situations where consumers go and bypass the meters and therefore, there's revenue lost.
Mr. Wonodi, very quickly before we go, when you look at the entire situation unfolding, what would you attribute kind of this logjam to? Is it the lack of enabling laws? Or is it really a lack of enforcement? When you talk about the various institutions, we talked about the judiciary, we talked about the legislature, all these actors, the regulator. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that the enforcement by the NERC, understanding what needs to be enforced and enforcing it, it's a big problem. I think within the sector, and that's why I said that, empower NERC, give it what it needs, and then let it go out and engage the people. CSOs should know exactly what is going on, so that these issues can be translated to
empowerment through amended legislation for NERC, is that it?
Well, if that is where it is, then maybe that needs to be done, because it could be that the EPSRA has not actually enabled NERC as it should.
All right, well, this is a fine place to leave it. I just want to thank you, Mr. Wonodi, for coming on the program. Standing by with us has been Rumundaka Wonodi, the former Chief Executive Officer of the Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading Company. We're just going to take a short break. We will be back in a few moments. Please do stay with us.